Aaron Sorkin, I interviewed Jessica Chastain yesterday, and she said after seeing this movie, she got quite angry with you in that she said, "Why have you deprived people for years of not directing?" Is that a true story?
It's very nice of her to say that. Uh, yes, it is a true story. It's the first thing she said to me after watching an early cut of the movie. Um, but the truth is, I've gotten a chance to work with great directors, and I like to continue to work with great directors. I had a wonderful experience directing Molly's Game, and I'm very proud proud of the final result. So I'd like to direct again too. But I guess the answer to Jessica's question is, I think the David Fincher version of The Social Network is probably the best available version of that.
Well, why was this the right time? You've obviously written a lot of screenplays, you've written plays, you've written some of the greatest television of the last 20 years. Why was this the right time to direct a movie?
Well, it's not that it was the right time. When I started writing the script, it wasn't with the intention of directing it. I began writing the script the same way I have the other screenplays that I've written. When I was done, I felt protective of this story. There are, speaking of available versions of different versions of the same story, what I felt was that in Molly's Game, there is a natural gravitational pull toward the shiny objects in the story. The decadence and the glamour and the money and the sex, and particularly the big Hollywood bold-faced names, the movie stars that played in this game. But that I had felt from the beginning, since the moment I read the book, but then I met Molly Bloom, and that was the big thunderclap, meeting her and getting to know her and hearing the real story. She really just wrote the tip of the iceberg in the book. She left a number of what I thought were important and emotional elements out of the book. And in particular, she didn't realize that she was a movie heroine, that she had done an extraordinary thing, requiring integrity and character and exactly the kinds of things that I'm drawn to as a writer. So when I didn't ask to direct the film, I was asked to by the producers, Mark Gordon and Amy Pascal. At first, I kind of all shucksed it. I thought that they were maybe just being nice or being impulsive or something about it, but they put a lot of thought into it. And they kept on me about it. And then I talked to directors I know and trust who were very encouraging. But finally, in the end, like I said, I directed it for two reasons. From the moment I met Molly, I felt that there was a very special story here, set against the backdrop of all that decadence and glamour and movie stars and money and poker, but a very personal story about an uncommon hero and an unexpected hero. And I just wanted that to make its way to the screen. And then the other reason was that I needed, speaking of those bold-faced Hollywood names, I needed to ensure that they were protected, that somehow this wouldn't be taken over by somebody who thought, gee, I can make this the buzziest movie of the year by making it about those guys.
Yeah. And Aaron, you've worked with some of the best directors, or your words have been directed by some of the best directors in TV and film, from David Fincher, Danny Boyle, Chris Miss, Tommy Schlamme, Alex Graves. From actually having directed yourself, what do you appreciate now about what they did that you couldn't before?
Well, I've never had any trouble appreciating what those people you just named have done. I've standing, and I did work with them. I've been on the set pretty much every day of production for everything that I've written. And in television, as a showrunner, you're involved in every aspect of production. I've never had any trouble understanding or appreciating what Mike Nichols did, or David Fincher, Bennett Miller, Danny Boyle. But what I still appreciate is their visual sense, which is something that I've never really had. You know, for me, for a guy who mostly, until Molly's Game, has written, you know, people talking in rooms, I hear these movies more than I see them, and the music of the language, and when we're crescendoing, and when it's an aria, and when it's a duet, those kinds of things were more important to me than the composition of the frame, for two reasons. One, I don't have any sensibility of the composition of the frame, and two, the director was going to take care of that. Well, by simply declaring myself to be the director of this movie, I didn't gain any more talent in terms of composition. But I had enough sense to know that I was going to need a very special cinematographer at my side. And I was very lucky to get Charlotta Christensen, who does have that great visual sense. And I was able to, just in describing the style that I saw the movie being in, and there's actually two distinct styles in the movie, one for when we're in present day, and one for when we're telling the story of how Molly went from being 100 yards away from making the Olympic ski team and going to Harvard Law School, how she ended up running underground celebrity poker games. That was going to be in a completely different style. Charlotta then was able to translate that to, okay, these are the lights that we need, these are the lenses that we need, here's how the camera's going to move.
One thing you've got to do as you wrote the screenplay and adapted this book is explain the world of poker to somebody maybe that's never gone through a poker game or known anything about it. What were your issues there as you wrote the script? You know, some of the stuff you do with the narration, some of it you do with the graphics on the screen, the way things are edited, but you're able to make that very accessible to the casual person that's watching the movie.
Yeah, well, that was important. I'm not a poker player myself, and my contact with it mostly is that I am a sports fan, and my TV will be on ESPN, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, when there's absolutely no other sporting event going on in the world, they will show poker, which is a terrible spectator sport. It's boring to watch, and it's kind of ugly to look at. But that was okay with me because I knew that this wasn't going to be a poker movie, okay? In the sense that there was never going to be a moment in the movie when we cared who won or lost a hand of poker. And in fact, there's only one scene where we dramatize a hand of poker from beginning to end. But there's a lot of poker in the movie, and it's shot in a way that kind of makes it more exciting than it really is. But the tool that I had at my disposal was the character of Molly. And the way I always saw this as the best TED Talk you've ever been to. That it wasn't the filmmakers telling the story, it was Molly telling the story. And she understands that she's telling the story to people who may not be familiar with poker. So she will explain to the audience that here's what's happening now, here's the worst thing that can happen. And we would put these graphics up on the screen, just as you might see if you were watching a poker game on television. These are the whole cards this person has. Here's their percentage of winning. Here's the card that they need. And Molly is taking us through this so that somebody who has never held cards in their hand before will understand the dramatic stakes of what's going on.
Aaron, we're an awards website at Gold Derby, and you were involved in West Wing. Well, you created the West Wing, one of the greatest Emmy success stories in terms of winning drama series and writing, directing, a lot of the actors winning. And about writing and words as sort of being like orchestral and like a composer. I think you even in this chat talked about the music of the words. And I'm just wondering what it's like seeing sort of the orchestra play. And is there a moment in The West Wing that you remember where it just like blew you away, particularly fond of seeing that crew and cast come together and play your words?
You know, I have incredibly fond, incredibly strong memories of The West Wing, and the cast and the staff and I remain very close to this day. What you just described, memories of everything coming together in an orchestral way, too many instances to enumerate here. I can tell you the first time that it happened. It was the third episode that we ever made. The episode was called Proportional Response. And there was a scene between, a climactic scene between Martin Sheen and the late John Spencer, where the two of them get into a big argument right before Martin Sheen has to address the nation and let them know that one of our planes was attacked by Syria, and that here's what he's ordered in retaliation. And watching these two men, watching these two actors go at each other in that scene, these two great giant actors go at each other in that scene. That's what you live for.
I got two West Wing related questions. One, I love the fact that you might be at the Oscars this year, and of course won an Oscar. And Allison Janney has turned in the performance of a lifetime in I, Tonya, and she might be at the Oscars this year. Could very well win. What's your feelings about that? That the timing of this might coincide.
I root for Allison Janney every day of my life. The performance that she's giving in I, Tonya, God knows that she deserves an Oscar. I only get to write it, to vote in the. I'm a member of the writers branch, so I don't have to say in whether or not she wins. But I hope she's there. If I happen to be there too, that will be a fantastic bonus. But staying with the West Wing and the awards theme, Allison, at our first Emmy Awards, the end of our first season, that night we broke the record for most Emmys won by one show in one night. Allison was the first Emmy that the show won. And I remember being there that night, and you know, people rolled their eyes when they hear you say it's an honor just to be nominated. But we really felt that way. We were a freshman show in the age of The Sopranos, The Practice, Law and Order, and ER. And we couldn't believe we got invited to the party. So we honestly were happy to just be there. And when, I can't remember now who it was who opened the envelope when they said, the winner's Allison Janney, we all leapt out of our seats. We couldn't believe it. I think it was the first time we realized that anyone had watched the show. Honestly, you go into this bunker for a while, and you come out, and you're not sure if anybody's tuning into NBC unless they know it's at 9 o'clock. So that was a great night. Allison would go on to win many more Emmys after that. The West Wing, the show that she's on now, Mom. There is no doubt in my mind that the woman is going to win an Academy Award. If it's this year, great. If it isn't, it will be next year or the year after the year.
And along those lines, I wanted to follow up with one of your executive producers, John Wells, is going into the TV Hall of Fame next week. What's your thought about that?
Well, he deserves it. John has produced some great television in his career. I'm very honored that one of the things that he produced was The West Wing, but China Beach was a phenomenal show. So was ER. He is a wonderful man who's also twice served as president of the Writers Guild. He really was, we talk now about the second golden age of television, and how, it can be said that the greatest theater in America right now is on television. And John can lay claim to being one of the people who ushered that age in.
Do you think, with thinking about your success with the Emmys and with that West Wing's moment, something that always struck me was how excited all the cast members were for the other cast members when they won?
Yeah,
even though they were competing.
And it's genuine. And I'll tell you a story. First Emmys, we had an overabundance of good fortune. We would routinely have 3 or 4 of our cast members in the Best Supporting Actor category nominated. And the first year, Richard Schiff won Best Supporting Actor. And the second year, Brad Whitford won Best Supporting Actor. And as soon as Brad's name was called, he didn't turn and kiss his wife. He didn't pump his fists up in the air. He turned around to John Spencer, who was sitting behind him, and said, "You're next," and went up on stage. And that's how it worked. Allison, after winning Best Supporting Actress the first 2 years, moved herself into the Best Actress category, submitted herself in that category. Not out of a sense of inflated ego. She understood that there was no lead actress. By the way, we had to beg. Tommy Schlamme and I had to go to Martin Sheen's trailer and beg him to submit himself in the Best Lead Actor category. It was his intention to submit himself in the Supporting Actor category because he felt that by submitting himself in the Lead Actor category, it was an insult to the rest of the cast, and particularly John Spencer, that this show he felt didn't have a lead, that it was an ensemble cast. We begged him to submit himself in the Lead Actor category, and the only thing that got him to do it was the idea that he might be, that by putting himself in Supporting Actor, he might be taking a slot away from one of the other guys. So Allison, after 2 years of winning Best Supporting Actress, did the same thing. She put herself in the Lead Actress category because she wanted to make room for Janelle Maloney and for Stockard Channing. And she was saying, 2 Emmys, I'm very, very happy. I'm not going to get greedy. She wins Best Actress. There's nowhere this woman can run where she's not going to win. I told her, okay, next year, submit yourself in the Best Actor category. In fact, submit yourself for Best Actor in a comedy, and let's see what happens. But she would go on to win a number of times for The West Wing, and then for, like I said, for her current show, and she's not yet done the best work she's going to do.
One final question as we wrap up. In addition to West Wing, one of my all-time favorite shows, the very underrated and short-lived Sports Night. Robert Guillaume passes away a couple of weeks ago. He was such a rock and anchor for all the shenanigans you had going on with other characters. His character really had such a weight on that show. What would you like to say about him in his memory with his passing just a couple of weeks ago?
We all had so much love and respect for Robert. He was the person on the show that you least wanted to disappoint because we regarded him as such a giant. As an actor and as a man, he came from a very, very tough childhood. He came from poverty. In an era that was tougher on African American men and women even than now, he didn't just conquer television with winning Emmys, by the way, for playing the same character on 2 different shows. He also had these thunderous turns on Broadway. But on our set, he liked a good joke. And he and Felicity Huffman were mercilessly. But when it came time to work, when it came time to rehearse, when it came time to shoot, if you weren't at least trying to reach the bar that Robert set so high, if you weren't at least trying as hard as you could to reach that bar, it's not that he chewed you out or even gave you a dirty look. You just felt miserable all on your own because you had a scene with Robert that day, and you gave it 98%, and he was giving it 100%. It was a terrible day when we found him in his dressing room when he had his stroke. It was in the middle of the first season, but after a few days of recovery, I went to the hospital and I told Robert, and he's got an extraordinary wife, Donna, that here's what I was going to do. I was going to give his character, Isaac Jaffe, a stroke. Obviously, it was going to happen off screen because Robert was no longer available. I was going to give the character a stroke. Sorry, not a joke, a stroke. So that if Robert ever wanted to come back to work, if he didn't, we'd certainly understand. But if he ever wanted to come back to work, no matter how much his speech might be impaired, no matter how much his physical movement might be impaired, it wouldn't matter. It's been explained. The character has a stroke. And sure enough, not years later, a matter of weeks later, and this is a very serious stroke he had, it wasn't a mild one, Robert was in the season 1 finale of Sports Night. He walked onto that stage, and a moving moment for all of us. I hope it was a moving moment for the audience. And then he did the whole second season trying to overcome a slight speech impediment that he had, a limp that he had. But I only had to give him a little bit less. I only had to write him down a little bit. I only had to take a speech that was 3/4 of a page and make it half a page, so that he could do it. He was a giant. He was a workhorse. He was a phenomenal talent. He was a beautiful, lovely man, and we'll all miss him, and we are all better for sharing a stage.
Well, Aaron, thank you for your time today. It's been such a pleasure, but you've got a wonderful movie on your hands here. I hope so many people go out and see it.
I'm sorry we didn't get to talk more about Molly's Game, but I hope people come see it. You're going to be surprised that you are uplifted by a movie about a woman who ran underground poker games.
Well, it's a wonderful one. I hope everybody gets out to see it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Aaron.